This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pals Grant and Joe Hoyt. So we're going to start off here with the Cowboys as usual. And although there's nothing usual about the Cowboys, this season has been all over the map, Joe. I can't think of a year when they look more out of it and more into it within a matter of games. And now they've put themselves in a position because they were on such a roller coaster early and lost games they shouldn't have lost to Carolina. And which, it turns out the Panthers are better than we thought they were, but still a fairly mediocre team. But losing to Arizona without Kyler Murray, that's just inexcusable. So they put themselves in a hole that makes it seem as if they want to get to the playoffs, they're probably going to have to win the division. They're probably going to have to win out. That would do it for them. I'm pretty sure. And is that the question? Is that doable? Can they win out?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of just kind of the ups and down roller coaster of this season, I mean, think about what Dak Prescott said yesterday. He said this is the most confident he's been in a team heading into December. And this is a guy that's been to the playoffs multiple times. They have obviously had 3 straight seasons of 12 wins where it didn't work out well once they got in the playoffs. Now it's a question of what will they actually get there, and they're confident, they feel good, and I think they should be. Frankly, I think you look at what they acquired after the bye in terms of getting Quinnen Williams specifically, but then also adding guys like Logan Wilson, DeMarvion Overshone. Savone Revel has been, I think, way better and more comfortable than they thought he would be so far. That's looking like a good pick for them as long as he could stay healthy. This is a different team than they were early this season. And I think that this is a team that if you look at the rest of their schedule, this is a tough game against Detroit, but Detroit's been kind of faltering, right? So if you can take advantage of kind of a slippery season for Detroit in this week on a week after Thanksgiving, I think that if you look at the rest of their games, they've got a really good chance to win out. Obviously you got to factor in potential for just weird games or weather, especially when you go to New York and DC at the end of the season. But this is a team that feels as confident as they've ever felt in the Dak Prescott era, which is kind of wild to think that they could miss out. The one thing I'll say too, I think the NFC East is their best path because right now this Eagles offense does not look like they have any rhythm, does not look like they have a lot of answers. It looks like the dysfunction that was creeping in has kind of taken ahead in terms of how it affects them. That's catchable, which is so wild to say considering where we were just 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, let's look at this from a couple of ways here. I want to first add, because the two things we brought up there, one about the Lions, but also about the Cowboys. Let's start with the one about the Cowboys and why Dak would feel better about it. I'm going to guess what Dak is talking about, and he has mentioned this before, is that A, Javonte Williams is the most physical running back they've had since Zeke in his prime. And B, his wide receivers are the best he's ever had. He's never had two wide receivers as good as these two guys are, George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb. And C, the defensive line, even though minus Micah, and I'm still not going to tell everybody, oh, that was a good trade. I'm going to wait on that. But those defensive tackles has given them the best run defense that they have had. I think probably since Dak has been here as well. Because it's been a problem stopping the run forever for the Cowboys. I would say the one thing that they are not as good at, I'm still not a believer, even though DeMarvion Overshone is back, that's a big addition. Their linebackers have been better than this at times, certainly in Dak's tenure. And the secondary has probably been better in Dak's tenure. Although Deron Bland is playing better now. And as you said, Ravel is playing well. And we'll see what happens if Trayvon Diggs ever comes back. But they're a little thin at safety. I love to do this. I love to look at the draft and what people are saying about it. I wouldn't mind if the Cowboys took a safety in the draft somewhere at some point and maybe brought in a little talent there. But anyway, I think those are all things that might be contributing to Dak saying that. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, no doubt. I think Dak Prescott's confidence has always been kind of rooted in things that he knows, right? And things that, he believes in. And he's got, high standards for himself, high expectations. I think Dak Prescott knows he's never had this much free ability to just throw it up to two incredible receivers. I mean, George Pickens is going to. I mean, shoot, is he going to get $35 million next year in a contract extension? Like, he has been playing that good. We asked him yesterday because if you kind of watch the Cowboys recently, you've noticed that George Pickens has had a lot of success on slant routes. And it's something in theory that should be beatable, right? Where you can maybe add a little bit of help from a linebacker. You can play inside leverage if you're a corner. That should be something fixable. George Pickens said, I'm inevitable when it comes to slants. You can't stop me. And then guess what? If you try to stop me, I'm going to run a slant and go and beat you deep for a 60-yard touchdown. Like, I think that Dak Prescott looks at those two wide receivers and says, man, I'm going to cook today. And then I think he knows that when I'm not throwing the ball, I can trust Javonte Williams to get 3 or 4 yards of carry and just kind of be consistent. He trusts Javonte Williams in pass protection. And I think that there's just a lot of confidence from Dak in what this offense can be. And defensively, you can't understate or you can't overstate, excuse me, how valuable Quinnen Williams has been. I think that he's looking like the guy that earned that big contract in New York, and he has talked about it too. He's never played along a defensive line like this. I think his presence has opened up more things for guys like Osa Odigizua and Kenny Clark to be the best versions of themselves, which cyclically has a better effect on Quinnen Williams himself. So this is a team that looks good. I mean, it's kind of hard to say it beyond that. I mean, they look night and day different from where they were earlier this season.
Evan, what do you think?
I was prepared to come on here and say I am fully on the Cowboys bandwagon, but I'm not.
You just couldn't do it. You just couldn't do it.
Here's the thing, guys. The one caveat on all this, I think Joe's said this in the pre-show meeting, such as it was. Their best route is still to win the NFC East, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means they've still got to make up essentially 2 games on Philadelphia, right?
Yeah, correct.
I mean, as bad as and inconsistent as Philadelphia has played with a schedule that's got the Chargers on the road at the Chargers, that could be a loss. Las Vegas, Washington, at Buffalo, which has been just as inconsistent as the Eagles, and then again against Washington. I'm not sure that I see 2 losses there. And so I think the Cowboys are a far, far better team than they were, and I think they are playing about as well as anybody in the NFC right now. I'm just not sure that they can overcome the hole they dug themselves at the outset.
And I think Joe kind of brought that up too. I'm not saying that they're gonna get there. I'm saying that they are certainly a lot better team. I think right now they are probably a better team than the Eagles are, which is kind of hard to say.
Well, they just beat the Eagles, and they beat them pretty.
They're better offensively than the Eagles. There's no question about that. And to your point, Joe, about Pickens, is that that George Pickens is the perfect guy to run that slant with because he's so big, because he has such a huge wingspan. He's boxing out those defensive backs. I agree with you, Joe. To your point, yes, you could move somebody over to clog that up, but then he's just going to take off. He's just, as we talked about last week, I think he's as talented a wide receiver as the Cowboys have ever had. I mean, I'm not saying he's the best wide receiver they've ever had. They've had some great ones. But he just is the complete package. He's big, he's fast, he's got great hands, great body control. I mean, I just don't know. Terrell Owens is a Hall of Famer, and he had terrible hands. So, Michael Irvin's a Hall of Famer, but he was more of a possession receiver. Pickens can do whatever you want him to do. It's just he's phenomenal.
He's having a phenomenal year. There's no doubt about it. He's having a phenomenal year, and Joe's right. I mean, I think that this is the best set of a 1-2 or 1-1A receiver combination that Dak has ever had, and I'm sure that's led into Dak's.
I think it feeds his confidence. I think you watch him throw the ball to Pickens. There's never. It's like every ball to Pickens is just almost perfect. It feels like to me he thinks this, and there's no hesitation when he lets go of the ball.
There's no metric for rapport, right? I mean, there's no metric for rapport except for maybe targets, and I mean they have a great rapport right now. I'd love for you to talk me off of this, Joe, but because I came away from the Thanksgiving Day game saying, okay, I'm on this bandwagon. I just don't know that they can overcome what they dug for themselves. And really, at this point, and really, at what point in time in the Cowboy season is it not about how deep can this team go?
So Joe, let's to Evan's point then. Let's talk about the Lions then, and this is probably really the best team they have left is the Lions. And going into this season, you would just chalk this up as an L, right? Even if the
Mhm.
Cowboys were going well, I would just sort of said it was an L. So what? But the Lions have really struggled this year. So tell us why you think that's so.
Yeah, I think it kind of just comes back to what they lost, right? I mean, anytime you lose two coordinators, it's going to be a challenge. It's something that my Oregon Ducks are potentially facing here, and I'm getting a little nervous for their future. They lost Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, and I know Aaron Glenn struggled in New York as a head coach so far, but that was the guy that they had a lot of confidence in from a defensive standpoint. Definitely looked really good when they beat the Cowboys handedly last season, and kind of embarrassingly last year. And then Ben Johnson, there's a reason why he was looked at as the number one head coaching candidate, right? It's because of his ability to be creative, his ability to be creative in the run game specifically. I think that without Ben Johnson, there's been a gap. They had another offensive coordinator this season that they took play calling duties away from to give to Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell hasn't called plays maybe ever. I mean, I'm trying to think of the last time he called plays. This is a guy that is more, of a CEO type head coach, not the genius play caller. And I don't think that he's like a terrible play caller, but there's a gap between what Ben Johnson is, as you see in Chicago. They are currently the number one seed in the NFC, which is wild to think and something we wouldn't have expected when we went to Chicago and watched them earlier this season. Um, it's crazy to me. So that's a testament to Ben Johnson. It's a testament to what they lost. And I do think, too, in terms of Jared Goff, I think this is a guy that runs play action well. This is a guy that, can get the ball out to weapons. But this isn't ultimately a quarterback that's been known to elevate, a quarterback that's been able to take things beyond what they are. A quarterback that takes things beyond what maybe the play call is. That's why with Ben Johnson, I think it was so successful. Maybe there's a little bit of a gap in terms of his play, too, under Dan Campbell as a play caller. The one thing I'll say about the Lions, though, and they've got some injuries, too, on defense to watch. Frank Ragnow on the offensive line. He's not coming out of retirement. He failed his physical. So that's another area where Quinnen Williams can have success. But the guy that they have to keep an eye on is Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams to an extent. But Jahmyr Gibbs is probably the most explosive player they'll play all season in terms of his speed, his after the catch ability. This is someone that can cause a lot of problems. This new look Cowboys defense has been fantastic. They haven't played speed, though, like Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm so curious to see, specifically maybe a guy like DeMarvion Overshown, how he can play in trying to kind of counteract Jahmyr Gibbs' speed. That's kind of the reason you have him. I wonder if you maybe see more Kenneth Murray than Logan Wilson this week because of just Kenneth Murray's extra speed. Something to keep an eye on is how much of an X factor Jahmyr Gibbs is.
Yeah, yeah, those are all great points, and especially the one about Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell. It's that just didn't it just feel wrong when a really great offensive coordinator leaves, and then the head coach says, "Okay, I'll just do it." It's like somebody should have said, "Oh no, this is not a good idea." I think of Dan Campbell as a guy who just because of his body language, because of who he is. I mean, he's a really good head coach because he especially for a town like Detroit and for a team like the Lions. Yeah, this is great. It's a great marriage of all of those things, but not an offensive coordinator. And I just think that this was if they struggle and if they don't make it, then there should be a change there. That should happen. But that obviously plays in the Cowboys' favor because they have done a great job, and Brian Schottenheimer I think clearly is a better offensive coordinator than Dan Campbell at this point because of the things he has done on offense this year has really been impressive. And that's I was in my Monday newsletter. I took a shot at Jerry for putting the team together on the fly instead of building this thing up in the off season so you could have had these guys and he explained some of that. But one of the things he said in that the other day was that they wanted to trade Micah Parsons to the Jets. And what Jerry said was that they wanted to trade Micah at a number one for Quinnen Williams, which would have really been insane to do that. So, Joe, tell me what you think that Jerry really meant in that.
Yeah, I think my Jerry translator had to come on and be like, I don't think that's exactly how that thing went. Reports out of New York are also and that wasn't an offer presented to them, and it doesn't make any sense. Why would the New York Jets decline Micah Parsons in a first round pick for Quinnen Williams and then turn around and trade Quinnen Williams for a second rounder, a first rounder, and Mozzie Smith? That makes zero sense in terms of what they would do. Um, I do know that the Cowboys wanted Quinnen Williams. That was a guy that probably was their number one target when they theorized where they could trade Micah Parsons and what they could get for him. That didn't come into fruition in the offseason, and I think that they were ecstatic to be able to get him for what they did at the deadline. I we'll see. I mean, Quinnen Williams, if you looked at what happened in New York, especially like this last season, you know, once he got paid, the kind of production dipped off, guys around him dipped off. You can also argue that losing Aaron White-Totten as a defensive line coach, who's now the defensive line coach in Dallas, may have played a factor. Losing Robert Saleh may have played a factor. But I think that this is a guy that we're going to look back at this trade and be like, man, that changed the Cowboys for the next 5 years. I think that has been their elusive goal, has been to find a run-stopping guy. It's why they drafted Mozzie Smith in the hopes that he could be that. I think they have it, and that's why, to be honest with you guys, when the trade happened, and again, it's totally fair to be critical about doing this on the fly, which I kind of think this was. But when that trade happened and it drew a lot of national, scrutiny about why would you do this trade right now, right? The Cowboys have no shot of making the playoffs. This makes no sense. This was always a trade for the future. This was always a trade for next year and beyond. And I think we've seen a great kind of example of what they could be in the future when you surround a guy like Quinnen Williams with some talent. So I think it's been an absolute game changer for him. And, there's a lot of value on what he brings.
Well, there's no question about any of that at this point now. Because I was one of the ones that said no too, because I thought the Cowboys were so terrible that you need to be keeping your first rounders. You don't need to be trading them. So let me ask you this, Joe, because everybody wants to say, well, see, now that was the right move to make to trade Micah Parsons so you can get that first round pick and trade it. Wasn't it possible they could have kept Micah Parsons and traded a first round pick for Quinnen Williams?
Yeah, and that's the ultimate, I think, caveat to all of this is like, yeah, maybe you don't get Kenny Clark, but what if you paired Micah Parsons with Quinnen Williams and Osa Odigizua, and then see just saw how that went. I think that's kind of the interesting thing as things played out, and I'm a big believer in this, guys. Like I look at it through the draft in terms of like, hey, you drafted a guy. You drafted a guy here. Let's grade that pick. And I think that those are valuable because it kind of gives us timestamp about what you thought, the context of why they made this decision when it happened, right? And I look at the same thing with the Micah Parsons trade. You can't change the fact that that was a wild trade. You can't change the fact that that was a trade that, in my opinion, didn't make any sense at the time, right? But to your point, Kevin, about building things on the fly, you can then grade how they responded to it. And I think they've responded to it well. Doesn't change the fact that they traded Micah Parsons, a generational pass rushing talent. But hey, they got something on the fly later on. And I think a lot of Cowboy fans will be like, hey, look at what Myles Garrett's doing in Cleveland. He's having perhaps the best defensive pass rushing season we've ever seen. And they're a terrible team. So
It does
ultimately,
not. It does not make the Micah Parsons trade a win.
no.
You're not. I think the book can be closed on that. You're not. You're never going to make that a win. But to your point, this team did respond well. And at the point that they made this trade, I thought it was a little bit of a lost cause. But they have responded really well, and they have reacted well to what was a poor trade. It does not mean that one justifies the other.
No, and one example too on that kind of same tone is the hiring of Brian Schottenheimer was not a good process. I mean, the way they did things, they didn't even talk to Ben Johnson, didn't talk to Aaron. It was not a good process. But how Brian Schottenheimer has handled things and how that's responded, that's actually looked a lot better than it was in early on too. So you can't change that grade, but he has shown that he has maybe the potential to change what happened after.
Well, he's been everything he's done has been great, right? I mean, everything he's handled, he was the right guy for this terrible situation with Marshawn Nealon. As I said, whether he's the right coach or not, he's certainly the right man for that situation. And so I think that everything has happened, has worked out. And there's a part of me that's like, I hate this because now Jerry will say, see, look, I know what I'm doing here. It's like, no, you don't. It's like you're just at the slot machine pulling on that handle. And this time it just happened to work. It just it kind of validates Jerry's way of running things, and that's the part I hate is that. But for Cowboys fans, I'm happy for them, because this is everything is starting to kind of fall into place a little bit here, and I think that's why I think Dak can see that. And I think that it's why he says that this is looking really good for them, and the question is going to be, as Evan noted, can they win that many games? I mean, it just seems crazy to think that they could because of the NFL. There's always inexplicable losses. But maybe they can get on a run here, and we'll see what happens and what happens with the Eagles. Thanks, Joe. That's going to do it for us.
Wait, before we let Joe go, I have an announcement to make, and I'm going to need
no.
Joe's input here. After 60 years, I have decided that my passive fandom in the NFL as an Atlanta Falcons fan is done. I'm done with the franchise. I
Yeah.
need a new team to be a passive fan of that, I wouldn't potentially cover and impact my conflict of interest. But you lose to the New York Jets after you get the ball with under a minute to play, and I've got to come up with a new team. So if you guys have input for me, I'd really like it because I'm a man without an NFL team any longer.
I think, Evan, I think one that might be a good idea because I think the Falcons have been broken since 28-3. And, maybe you should just go for a team with, a lot of low expectations, but optimism. What about the Raiders? Can I interest you in the Raiders?
Well, they do have Brock Bowers, but that's you want to talk about a franchise that's broken, Joe, for crying out loud. Kevin, you got any ideas?
Well, I think you should just stick to college football. I mean, you already adopted Georgia, which wasn't even your school. So, I mean, you might as well just, stick with that.
It's a better, in my mind, it's a better product, but I still need an NFL team to have some passive interest in. Maybe I'll glom on to the Bears for some reason.
Well, there you go. Take the Bears. Take the Bears. That's a good one. Yeah, Ben Johnson. Yeah, that's what Joe brought up a while ago. So that didn't even talk to Ben Johnson. He was my guy. I tell you, another guy I wish the Cowboys had talked to, or at least I did at the time, was Mike Vrabel. Things have sure worked out well for him in New England as well, right? There's two guys, and I'll have to say this: there's two guys who've gone and done a great job this season, and you still don't feel bad about hiring Brian Schottenheimer at this point. So.
No.
So that's that really says something. When that's how it panned out.
It doesn't say anything about the process, though. It still does not say anything about.
That's what I mean. That's what's so bad about all of it. It's just like he was just spinning the wheel, and it worked out, and then here we go. So,
you know what Jerry would tell you? He'd say, you know what? Just trust the process. Trust the process.
I'm not trusting him.
Except
Thanks,
there
Joe.
is no process. All right, take care, Joe.
All right, Evan. So you took a little minute here to write about the Rangers and looking back what those guys did for them. Because that basically now the World Series team is over. If you look at the lineup of the regulars, I mean there are people on the team like Josh Smith that are still left, but
there are 7 players, and that's including Ezekiel Duran, who did not appear but was on the active roster for the 2023 World Series. There are 7 of those players still remaining with the club. If you want to include Coach Travis Jankowski, it's 8, but it's less than a third of the roster.
Let me ask you this about that, because I don't ever really quantify that from year to year. Obviously rosters churn all the time, but even for 2 years ago, that's a lot, don't you think?
Yeah,
considering it was a World Series team.
It's a big. It's a lot of turnover. I mean, I would expect that you'd have, if it was a really fully homegrown team, maybe you'd have about 14 or 15. You'd expect to at least have 10, but 7, 7 seems like, I haven't gone back and looked at teams 2 years out from a World Series, but 7 seems like a real significant turnover.
Yeah, because when you look at it, really the only two guys, the regulars who are left, just the left side of the infield, right?
Yeah. I mean,
that just sounds great. Now that was an older team in a way, right? Not old, but an older. It wasn't particularly young. I mean, some guys Obviously, Evan Carter came on at the end of the year and made a big splash, and Josh Smith was a valuable, utility player, but it wasn't, that old. It just seems kind of phenomenal that is all happening. And look, and I will say this: I don't have a problem with it. I mean, that's probably what needed to happen. That they needed to turn over and move on with these guys.
Look, as a baseball valuation decision, these decisions to let these players go was pretty easy. That doesn't mean that there's not some sentimental pull for what Adolis Garcia and Jonah Heim and Marcus Semien and Josh Spores all meant to the 2023 World Series team. And I will just stop for 1 second to say, I think it's still entirely possible that before it's all over with, the Rangers could re-sign Spores to a minor league deal. I think there's some rationale to do that. But
Yeah,
even at $1 million in a roster spot, that was going to be a little bit much for the Rangers to invest in him. Yeah, it is significant turnover. And Kevin, it just goes to the same thing. We've used words that have gotten us in trouble, but it goes to the same point. That was a fluke one-off World Series champion. They got hot at the right time and they won a World Series, and great for them. But they preceded that with 6 losing seasons. They followed it up with 2 non-winning seasons. It was a one-off thing, and it's better for the Rangers to understand that and tweak this roster um, than to continue to hope that they're somehow going to recapture that glory.
yeah, no question about it. Uh, but it doesn't uh, detract either from the point that, and I told you this. I had a soft spot in my heart for Adolis Garcia. I don't know what it was. I guess because what a story to come. He comes to the U.S. He plays for the Cardinals, and the Cardinals kind of give up on him. And the first time I saw him play right field, I thought, well, my gosh, why wouldn't the Cardinals have just kept him for this? He plays a great right field, a great arm, and then he becomes a really terrific player. And the Astros, he destroyed the Astros single handedly. And watching him play there in Minute Maid Park, in the ALCS, that was just a tremendous show. And that's when I think of Adolis, I will always think of that.
And that was kind of the point of my column is, look, the last 2 years, all these players either struggled or had health issues, however you want to size it up. But when they returned to Arlington and forevermore, you know, Marcus Semien set a major league record for games started and plate appearances over the course of 2023, starting every game in the regular season, starting the All-Star game, and starting every game of the postseason. No player has ever come to bat as much as Marcus Semien did. He was the epitome. If that club's biggest asset was that it was all business, he was the epitome of that, showing up every day and performing. Garcia, as you mentioned, when this team didn't have a pulse in 21 and 22, Adolis gave it something to watch. Uh, and in 23, he was Corey Seager may have been the World Series MVP, but Adolis was the postseason MVP. He carried that team in the ALCS, won the ALCS MVP. He had big contributions in the World Series, including the walk-off home run in Game 1, right up until that point in time when he tore his oblique. You look at Jonah Heim, was an all-star catcher that year, was really a productive offensive player, looking like he was going to break out, had an injury that was initially recommended he have surgery for that would have knocked him out for the season, came back 2 weeks later, and then started every game of the postseason behind the plate. That's incredible wear and tear. And his home run in the 9th inning of Game 5 pretty much gave the Rangers the breathing room to say, okay, this is really going to happen. And then, of course, Josh Spores with the incredible run in the postseason, capped off by that high curveball to Ketel Marte that clinched the World Series. All those guys have indelible marks on a historic run for the Rangers. And the last 2 years have been unfortunate, but hopefully as time goes on, they remain legends in this club's history.
I'd like to see at some point, maybe 5 years out, 10 years out, whatever, from that World Series, they get all those guys back together and celebrate all that, because that needs to be celebrated again.
Oh,
Especially,
well, I think they're gonna celebrate the '96 team. This is gonna be the 30th anniversary of the '96 team, the first playoff team in Rangers history, coming up this year, and I think the Rangers will celebrate that, and I think they will, as they continue to try and build on a legacy, they will do that, with anniversaries. So
yeah,
I
they
look for
will.
that to happen. Of course, in five, in a lot of teams, 5 years out from the World Series win, most of those guys are still there. But this is kind of the point. These guys are all going to be scattered elsewhere.
Yes, they will. All right, that's going to do it for the Rangers segment of our podcast. We'll move over now and talk about colleges. What another wild weekend it was in college football. And I'm not even talking about Lane Kiffin going to LSU, where he will get paid for every postseason win of Ole Miss this year. He'll get the bonuses he would have gotten at Ole Miss had he stayed and won those games. That's just the world is just spinning backwards.
Before we
Can't
get
believe
into anything related to Lane Kiffin and LSU, let me say this about that. I still maintain that on the decision making process, money aside, this was a mistake for Lane. I think LSU, you look at the political dynamic at LSU, that's going to be a mess. I think he would have been a perfect fit in Florida. But this is Lane Kiffin, and we can get into that in a minute. Let's talk about some stuff on the field first.
Sure. Well, wait, to your point about that, I've said this for years, that there are more good players per capita in Louisiana than any other place in the country.
There
Doesn't mean
are.
there's more players. There's more players in Texas and Florida and California, but there are more good players per capita. If you can keep all the good players in Louisiana and get a few from Texas and a few other places, that's what makes it different from all the other SEC schools. They have more, because Texas players are all going to different places, right? But in Louisiana, you get to keep all of them. You might just win a national championship. And they've
You know,
won the last four coaches, three of them won national championships. So that's why Brian Kelly's not here anymore. So I can see all of those things why he thinks it'll work better there, because he has a bigger chance to win because of that and the commitment to it. But to your point, yeah, it's a crazy place to work. I think that Florida is the sleeping giant myself. I think that they are, and we talked about this before. It's a very Texas-like school. I think the Texas is more like Florida. Florida is more like Texas than any other two schools in the SEC. So I really do think that would have been the better fit as well. But that's not what he did. And I got to tell you, doesn't college football feel a little bit like a reality show these days? It is upstaging the NFL
it
because of
is.
all the stuff.
It's a better product on every level. It really is. It's a better product to watch on every level. The talent of the players in the NFL and the skills may be refined, but I enjoy watching college football so much more than the NFL right now.
Well, it's just so many crazy things, and stuff happens, and the rivalry games really mean something. And I think part of it is too that everybody's playing somebody different, right? So here's the deal. After the games, of course, Texas beats A&M and beats them fairly handily, right? 27-17, and the second, first half was just awful. Neither team was any good. Just terrible. Second half, Texas just blew them out, basically. They had a running game. As soon as they got Quintrevious and Wisner going, then all of a sudden Arch Manning looks like a different quarterback. And so then they were able to
Shocker.
bottle them up. So that kind of upset the apple cart. So when I do my best in Texas rankings, I know full well that obviously A&M's only lost one game, right? They're not going to fall very far in the CFP rankings, which come out as we're taping this on Tuesday night. I'm sure they're not going to fall past 7.
I think they'll be 5 or 6.
Yeah, they'll be behind Texas Tech, as they should be. But with my best in Texas rankings, and I put them up there. I got Tech number 1, and then I put Texas number 2. To me, the thing about Texas is that they were not a good team all year long. The loss to Georgia looked bad. The loss to Florida looked awful, and they didn't look great in the loss to Ohio State either. But I will say Ohio State and Georgia at their places, they're pretty good. You know, those aren't terrible losses. And when you look at who the the Aggies played, they won on the road against Notre Dame. That's a good win, and they won on the road against LSU, and that's a good win. But listen, that's not LSU's not a great
Right.
program right now. So, uh, and I think we saw in that game, afterwards, Mike Elko complained about his defense as he should have. They had some bad fits in there. They didn't do well stopping the run in the second half. But there was a lot of talk about Marcel Reed being a Heisman Trophy winner, or at least in the running for it. And I like Marcel. He's a good player, but really, for all the consternation about Arch Manning, I think in that game we saw that Arch Manning was the better quarterback of the two.
Well, he performed better. But I just want to get to this, Kevin.
Okay.
After all of this, and we heard Sark on the field, and I don't expect Sark to say, no, we're not a playoff team. But is Texas a playoff team? Should Texas go to the playoff?
You're asking me?
Yes.
No, I don't think so because I can't really say there's too many teams in front of them. That's my point. Is that if you look, unless you want to drop unless the Big 12 just gets one, unless the ACC just gets one, uh, and then you got the best of five, the group of five, in which probably there's a shot for UNT to get that. I think UNT is a better team than Tulane, so I think that they could get in too. But if that's just one apiece, and then the Big Ten gets three with Oregon, Ohio State, and I'm leaving out somebody. Oregon, Ohio State, and
Indiana.
Indiana. Excuse me, Indiana. Uh, is that then maybe they could get six in, but only if they get six. I think the interesting thing is that Texas beat Oklahoma and A&M, and both those schools got in. Are going to get in. So I can see the point for it, and I think you can make a point also. They played the fifth toughest schedule in the country, so or at least by some markers. So I think that they got nobody else to blame but themselves. They couldn't lose to Florida. If they hadn't lost to Florida, well then yeah, for sure they'd be in.
And this is my point here is nobody is faulting them for losing to Ohio State at Ohio State, and nobody's faulting them for losing to Georgia in Athens. Those don't work against them. What works against them is losing to a team that fired its coach 4 games into the season and to an interim coach in Florida. And Texas, you can kind of distract everything away from that Florida loss, but that's what will keep them out of the postseason, not the Ohio State or the Georgia loss.
And that's a great point. And Sark had a point for that too. Well, one of the teams playing for the national championship last year lost in Northern Illinois at home. So, yeah. So stuff happens. That's why I'm always amazed when people say, "Oh, there's no way this team should be in," or "There's no way this team should be out," or whatever. It's like that's the deal about college football. It's not like the NFL. You're not playing the same teams. And even in the NFL, I mean, at least you don't play everybody, right? And so some teams have easier schedules than other teams. And in college football, that's really the case. And that's one of the problems for me in these leagues getting so big. When you've got 16 teams in your league, you're not playing the same schedule as everybody else. A&M didn't have to play Georgia, they didn't have to play Alabama. And that's kind of a big two, not to have to play either one of them.
Although I will say, with a 9-game schedule, it is kind of unusual that A&M didn't just fall into playing a game or two against really high-ranked opponents.
Yeah.
It is just the luck of the draw. But you know, that as it may, I can't punish them for winning their games. You know, I mean, they
Oh
went
no,
out and they won. I
no,
I just don't
until
see
they played Texas, and that was to me that's the issue. Is
right.
that so? You got all the way to there, and then you lost by 10 points.
Yeah,
And I think some of that's being a rivalry game. I think that was the one thing I had for Texas going into that was, well, you just never can tell. And Texas has had the upper hand on A&M for the most part this century. At the end of the last one, A&M had really taken charge of the rivalry, but before that, before the '80s, it was all Texas. So you can't discount that sometimes, and I think that's what really got to Marcel Reed after the game, and Arch Manning went over and
yeah.
talked to him, and he talked about how classy that was that he did that.
But
So
to get back to the point, I just don't see a way. You know, I'm doing the math here, right? You got 5 SEC teams that are locks, right?
yeah,
Georgia, A&M, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Oklahoma.
see, I would have said
5.
the only one that I wouldn't necessarily said Oklahoma was a lock. I think that Oklahoma's really good, but their offense isn't very good. They have a great defense. They don't have a great offense. And Texas beat them pretty handily. And that was the one thing I was thinking that the committee might look at it like, all right, look, Texas beat Oklahoma, and it beat an undefeated team in the last game of the regular season. And so I was thinking maybe, and who knows what the committee does. I don't think they're going to push them up that much. I mean, they had Vanderbilt over Texas, and Texas beat Vanderbilt.
And then
So
Vanderbilt beat Tennessee by 21 points on Saturday.
yeah, so I just think that if Texas had come in to this week or last week at 12, well then okay, then I could see them. Yeah, they could easily move up. I mean, you could move up because here's the thing you have to remember: you got to move up to 11. You can't move up to 12 because at 12 you're going to get bumped out by one of the of the lesser teams, right?
Well, there is one scenario here, right, where you could get a 6 SEC team in, and that is if Duke beats Virginia in the ACC championship game.
Well, and then the thought was then that James Madison might get in.
Well,
Because
I mean, wouldn't James Madison was in the AP poll? They were higher than North Texas.
well, that's certainly a possibility that they could do that. So that would be screwing and then the mean green. So it is these things make my head hurt trying to think about it. I'm on Friday night on deadline, I'm trying to think about all this kind of stuff, and I'm and trying to get as much information as I can, and it's like it's just too much for me.
It,
My
it,
little
y-
my
yeah,
little wee brain, it's a little too much. So we'll,
you
we'll see
can't
what they
shove it
think
all
about it.
into Friday night because you got to wait especially with all those rivalry games, you got to wait for everything to clear on Saturday.
It was a mess. All right, so we had talked about SMU losing the Cal. My gosh,
Poor
what
Nick,
a
my poor
disaster.
Nick. He
Uh,
was just he was
so
texting me
yeah,
Saturday night. He was so sad.
I'm sure he was.
And
I
then he
mean,
was defeated that Florida hired Sumrall and that Arkansas hired Silverfield. He had a rough week.
well, it was very crazy. I mean, I cannot believe the Mustangs lost to Cal. I mean, Cal has been better this year, but come on, you can't lose to them. And there were like 12 people in the stands. It was just a miserable looking game.
And
And
then Cal fired its coach.
yeah, I mean, it's just that was a terrible loss.
It
They
was. It
the
was.
SMU was on the biggest roller coaster of anybody in the state all year. They beat Miami, they beat Louisville. Those are big time wins to win
I
those
thought they
games.
had really, really gotten on the right track. But, it is. You're playing a game on the West Coast. You're coming off a huge win. Um, there's pressure ramped up that everything is right there for you. There's just no accounting for all of that. I feel bad for SMU because I really do think they had made some great strides again this season as the season progressed. But um, yeah, that one is. I didn't see that one coming, though I should have, based on all the texts I got from my son.
Yeah. Well, I will say this, and I know you and I talked about this before. I think this is kind of a bridge year for SMU and Texas. I see them bouncing back next year with big years because they're getting their quarter. I think Kevin Jennings will come back, and obviously Arch is coming back to Texas. It'll be interesting to see what Marcel Reed does at A&M. I don't know. Well, I guess off the top of my head, if he still has any eligibility left. But that will be a big factor for the Aggies to see what happens there. We didn't talk about Texas Tech. Look,
Nothing to talk about. They just keep steamrolling opponents at this
they
point.
do. You know how they lost Arizona State, I don't know, but they are just killing everybody. That is really, I think they're gonna end up with a first round bye.
So that was where I wanted to wind this whole thing up. Was what are your 4 seeds? Because we've got to account for championship weekend this weekend.
Yeah.
What are your 4 seeds?
I don't. You know what? I just don't think I don't think Alabama can beat Georgia twice in 1 year. I think Alabama. Everybody talks about Georgia struggling. And Gunnar Stockton wasn't good last week, and that's just Gunnar Stockton. He's kind of up and down, and he's not great. But they don't. He doesn't have to be great for them. Their defense is so good. I got to think that the top 4 seeds then, because if Alabama loses, then Alabama will fall out of the top 4. So the top 4 would be for me Ohio State, number 1. Number 2 would be Oregon. But that in the Big Ten championship game.
Ohio State plays Indiana in the Big Ten championship.
Okay, so one of those. So I think Ohio State will beat Indiana. So that will drop it, but they won't fall very far. So it will go. I think you'll have 3. I think you'll have 3 Big Ten. Well, that can't happen though. They're not going to put 3 Big Ten teams in the top 4.
Here's my top 4.
You give them to me first. Okay.
All right. I have Ohio State beating Indiana, so they stay number 1.
Right.
I have Georgia beating Alabama. Georgia elevates to number 2.
Yeah.
I have Texas Tech winning convincingly in the Big 12 and moving up to number 3.
Yeah.
And Indiana dropping to 4.
That makes sense. And then you have Oregon 5.
Yeah, Oregon probably 5.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's good.
Probably Oregon 5, Alabama maybe 6. So then Alabama's got 3 losses. So
See,
probably have to fall
I think
further.
Alabama has to fall further than that because then A&M's only got 1 loss.
Yeah, so A&M probably 6. You're right.
So yeah,
You've got Oregon. You've got Oregon and A&M. Those 2 teams that have 1 loss each. That didn't play in their conference championship. So that's probably 5 and 6 right there.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I do think that Ohio State's the best team in the country. And I don't think they've played nearly the schedule that everybody else that the SEC teams have played because the bottom half of the Big Ten's terrible. But they've really got good players. So I'm gonna, if I had to guess right now, I'd pick Ohio State to win it. I don't have their opponent yet because I just think everything else is just a free for all. I could imagine just about anything happening on any of these other games, right?
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. And look, I think if Georgia gets its offensive line back together, it probably goes deep into the playoffs. Can it make the championship game? Maybe. But I think that was the biggest issue in the Tech game is that they basically were playing with no offensive line. So if that continues, who knows what the future is? And it is wide open.
Yeah, and which is always good, right? And this is what makes it great. This year, I really feel like the football tournament is going to be a lot like the basketball tournament. There'll be a lot of intrigue about it, and because they'll be pretty much matched up, and I think anything can happen. I just don't. It's the first before we had the 12-team playoff when it was just 4. It was like clockwork. This team wins, this team loses, and now what we've got here with 12, which I still think that 12 is enough. Frankly, for me, it doesn't need to go to 16 in my mind.
I could listen. The buys and everything. I could accept a 16-team tournament. I can't see it going any further than that.
Well, just there's a question at some point how many games you want these guys to play, and I think that's a big issue for me, and when they're going to play them. I could always get rid of the conference championship games. I think that's That's the one thing for me is that if you want to expand it, then you have to get rid of the conference championship game, which is just fine.
If you go to 16, though, you're only having 4 teams play one extra game.
Yeah, I just think there's a way. There is a way to do it. I've never liked the conference championship game. I've always just feel like, didn't we just play this all year long? It wasn't that what this was supposed to be. It's a little different now because the leagues are so big and not everybody plays each other. So
I don't know. Listen. I covered the first SEC championship game at Legion Field, and I still, I know I will always go down as an SEC snob, and it just means more and all that other stuff. But I do love that game. And look, all my homeboys in Atlanta were saying, they wanted Texas A&M to win so that Georgia wouldn't end up in the SEC championship. And me, stupid me, I'm like, no, I want to still win the league. So I get it, and at the same point in time, I also really treasure that SEC championship.
yeah, well, it's all fun. All right, that's going to do it for our podcast this week. We thank you for checking in with us. We'll be back next week when we'll talk a little bit more about it. We'll have a really good idea where everything is by that time. We'll have a better idea about the Cowboys.
Then we'll talk about the winter meetings. I'll be in Orlando for fun times at the winter meetings.
Oh, you in Orlando. How great is that? So from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.